presenter is a good friend of mine, dear friend of mine, Daniel Brisebois. He's director of Turn the Soil. You'll see he's here, but he also has a cooperative farm, and he's also strongly involved in the Garlic Festival in St. Anne de Bellevue. So he's going to give an overview of everything. He also is a market basket producer, and I don't know the amount that he does, several hundred, and on a certain size of farmland, which is amazing, and it's organic, and so all these things are possible. So we invited Daniel last year, and we invited him back again. So without further ado, Mr. Daniel Brisebois.
Thank you. So I'm Dan Brisebois. I'm one of the founding members of Turn the Soil Cooperative Farm. We started in the fall of 2004. 5 of us met studying agriculture at McGill University, McDonald campus, and we started working on farms together, and then we launched our farm together. And so we run as a worker co-op, which means that the workers are the owners, and originally there was the 5 of us. And over time, we got other people started working with us, and then a number of them have joined the co-op since then. So we currently have 10 people who are co-op members, 10 who are not co-op members. Somebody who works for us, after 18 months, they can ask to become an auxiliary co-op member, kind of like a trial period. And then after an additional 18 months, they become an actual member. So this is not all of us. It's hard to get us all in one shot these days. People have different commitments in lives, but this is most of us. I think it was 36 minutes to get here this morning. So we're in Les Cèdres, not that far from here. Here's our fields from the top. And we are vegetable growers. We do vegetable baskets. We used to do farmers markets, but we phased out of that because we wanted to keep our weekends. And so we do 500 weekly vegetable baskets, or a week. So 500 families come and get vegetables from us, either on the farm or in the West Island in Point Claire and Beaconsfield. We're also seed growers, and so we have our seeds here. And so about half of our business is vegetables, half of our business is seeds. We have an online store, we have seed racks, and we grow about 50 to 70% of the seed that we sell. We also have other people who grow seed for us in the area, and some grow seed out west in climates that are a little bit better for some crops. And I'm also the host of the Seed Growers podcast, where I interview different seed growers about, we go into depth conversation about growing seed, and I also run the Farmer Spreadsheet Academy. There's not any spreadsheets today, though, in this session. It might disappoint some, others might be happy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you 3 stories, and we're going to do a harvest story. So I'm going to walk through kind of just, how the crops get out of the field and get into our vegetable basket program, just to give you an idea what kind of a weekly basis looks like. And I guess I should say I'm not really involved in the vegetable harvest much these days at all. I do really work on the seed harvest, but it's a big part of our farm, so I'm going to share that. And then I'm going to go through 2 crops. I'm going to go through a sweet pepper or hot pepper story, and then a winter radish story. And with each of those, I'm going to talk about how we grow them, both in terms of eating, but then also what that looks like in terms of keeping the seed for ourselves and selecting it. There's a lot of crops that we grow on our farm that we don't keep the seed for. We buy most of the seed that we actually use to grow commercial vegetables. So this is not necessarily representative of all the crops that we do, but it's some of the ones that we do keep the seed. So let's do the harvest story. And it begins at about 7:30 in the morning, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, actually less Fridays now, and starting off by washing all the bins that were used in the last vegetable harvest. And so here's, set them out. Actually, we now have a machine that we use to clean them, but for a long time it was just us with hoses and rain gear. And then we all gather around, and I'm saying we, but I haven't been in front of this board in about 5 years, so it's a collective we of Turn the Soil. So the team gathers in front of the board, and then the harvest manager walks through what we're going to do that day, and assigns different harvest tasks to different people and hands them a clipboard with the crops that they're going to be in charge of, and then they go out. And so there's different harvest leads that will lead smaller teams with different crops. And they go out, and we start with the greens. That's the first thing that we harvest will be the leafy greens, because we want to get them out of the field before the heat comes in, and that's a higher quality crop. And so some of it's as simple as just using a knife and cutting the vegetable out of the ground. We also have some equipment, like this is a greens harvester this is arugula, but for salad greens that are densely packed, we can use this to harvest them in. Again, this is going to happen earlier in the day before the heat of the day comes in. Here we're harvesting carrots. You might not be able to see it, but there's those orange things in the ground. And so we pass beforehand by breaking them by hand, the leaves, and then we use an undercutter to loosen the roots, and then the team goes in, pulls them out, and puts them into bins and send them back to the wash station. We're also harvesting flowers and other crops. So kind of harvest that way through the day. It goes back to the wash station and gets washed. And then, so we used to go to market, we don't now. So the next, what we do is we load up the van. Yep.
Are you selling the flowers, that's why you're washing them?
So we actually don't wash the flowers. I kind of lump them in saying washing. We wash the vegetables, but we do sell the flowers. We have, as part of our basket program, people can sign up to get a weekly bouquet of flowers, and so we make those bouquets, and then folks pick them. We also have a pick your own garden at the farm for the people who come to the farm, and that's just part of their membership, but they got to make their own bouquet in that context. Yeah.
Sorry, just before I forget the question, earlier you had said that you're a seed seller as well, but that you still purchase a lot of seeds. I'm just wondering why.
Let's bring that back. Don't forget, it's a really great question. Let's bring it back at the end. But definitely ask questions as you go along. But this is a good one for a discussion at the end. So we load stuff in our truck, and then we head off to the drop-off. This is like about 20 years ago, what a drop-off looked like in the early years. And now, so people sign up, or not sign up, they line up, we take their name, and then there's a list of vegetables, and then they'll fill their basket and take it home. And so these days it looks more like this with, tents and long lines, and then folks go down both sides of the line. One of the things, so it's about 100 people are picking up at each of the drop-offs that we're at, and so one of the things is how to get people to move through in a way that they feel is friendly. And so kind of we space things out a little bit out, and we have people going down both sides of the line. This is our drop-off at the farm. And here's also at the farm, sometimes in the fall, we'll have people doing bulk vegetables, filling up containers to put them into their own bags. And here's our farm also. And then at the end, we get back and we have the dirty bins, and we have to wash them the next morning. So that's kind of what guides a lot of what we do. So that's kind of just the backdrop of our farm. Now I'm going to talk about two crops. The first is going to be the peppers. And peppers and hot peppers and sweet peppers are pretty similar in almost all regards. I mean, the spiciness is a big difference between the two, but in most regards, growing them is going to be similar. So what I'm saying can apply to both of them, and I'll tell when it makes a difference. So their life cycle starts in the greenhouse, where we seed them in open trays that have these rows that you can see the rows that we've marked. Put about 50 or 60 seeds per row. And then when they germinate and have their first true leaves, we'll pot them up into 3-inch pots so that it's a bigger plant, a bigger space to grow. And they get taller. And then those will go out to the field, and we're going to transplant them in the field by hand. And we grow our tomatoes and peppers and a couple other crops on black plastic just because our growing season is not quite long enough to be growing some of these crops in bare soil. So this captures this heat and gives them a head start. It's also good for capturing humidity. We have drip tape underneath this, so it keeps it nice and moist underneath there. So plant these by hand. And in so for hot peppers, almost all hot peppers we can do really well out in the field. For sweet peppers, the earliest sweet peppers can do okay in the field, but we grow most of our sweet peppers in these tunnels. We call them caterpillar tunnels, kind of look like a segmented caterpillar, and they're about 14 foot wide, maybe about 7 foot tall, about 300 foot long. So we'll have a row of tomatoes down the middle, and then we'll have 2 rows of peppers on each side. And with this, it's warmer in the spring, so the peppers get going earlier, and it's warmer in the fall, so the peppers mature longer, and then we can close the sides in September on those nights where there's going to be frost. And so often in September there's 1 or 2 cold nights, and if you can get through that, then you can keep having peppers going into October. So that's one of the advantages of having the caterpillar tunnels. So we'll grow most of our sweet peppers in here. A few of the hot peppers, like habaneros, which are more like, they like to be on the islands, we'll grow them in there, but almost everything else will be in the field. Now, here's a bunch of different pepper plants, and you can see each plant has different amount of fruit on them. And so as a seed grower, one of the things I always want is the next generation to be better than the current generation. And that means different things. So I'm looking at different traits, but one of the things I'm looking at is how many fruit are there on a plant? How early are the plant? Do they look nice? I'm also looking to see, is there a decent amount of leaves? Like, you don't want just fruit and no leaves, because then the fruit can get sunburnt. Also looking to see if in the middle of the plant, are the fruits kind of spaced out, or are they stuck in one clump? Because if they're in one clump and you take them, you can break the branches, and that compromises the rest. So, I definitely want a tasty, beautiful, disease-free fruit, but I also want a plant that produces a lot of fruit, that are early, and that can keep a good amount of fruit over the season. So I'm looking at that, and so as I choose the plants I want, you can see there's these orange flags that are gone through. So I will flag individual plants at different times. Sometimes, if I'm really ahead of the curve, I might flag maybe as a white flag that shows they're early, and then there's maybe like a pink flag that's like for yield. So I might select different flags, but just having a flag is better than nothing. And not all of our production beds are used for seed selection. Often we'll grow seed, 1 year every 3 or 4 years because the seed stores very well. But we can also but if you have flags, then people know, don't pick the fruit off of those ones. You pick the fruit off the other ones, because that's going to be the seed harvest. Here's a plant with the flag beside it. And then, it's harvest time. And so in terms of vegetable harvest for CSA or for vegetable baskets, we'll just go through and we pick all the fruit off of anything that's not marked and put it in bins and take it out. And we'll often aim to have a similar number of fruit per bin, because then, let's say we have 100 people going to a drop-off. We want to give them 3 peppers each. We need 300 peppers, and then if there's 50 peppers per bin, then we know we need 6 bins. Maybe we do 6.5 just to make sure. But we try to keep things sort of standard, or as standard as we can, to make it easier down the line. So this, this winds up going to people. They eat it and love it, we hope. And then the other part is in terms of keeping seed. So if you want to get a pepper seed, you need peppers that are ripe. So this started off green, and it turns, this was a yellow pepper, but it could have turned orange or red if it was a different variety. So we get them to be nice and ripe, open them up, there's the seed. Take it out. So that's basically keeping the seed. So you could do that with any pepper that you have. Peppers will cross-pollinate, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But it's really as simple as this, getting the pepper seed out. Now, if you're growing just for your own farm or your own garden, a fruit will have, a couple hundred seed, so it doesn't take long to get a few thousand seeds. So this level of high-tech works quite well. For our seed company, we're harvesting pounds of seed at a time. So in that case, we have what's called the millet wet seed extractor. So this is a machine where we pour in peppers in the top, and then there's beaters or kind of blades that chop them up, and then the flesh and the seed comes through, and there's water jets pushing the seed down, and there's two layers. There's a kind of the mesh, and then there's a metal part on the bottom, and the bottom part is shaking, or one of them, the bottom part is shaking, and it kind of makes that and gravity makes the flesh come out on one side, and then the seeds and the water come out here. And what's my next shot? And then we collect that. So this stuff here is going to wind up in compost. Like, this is something that, the advantage of doing it by hand is that you can eat this part, you know, but it takes time. Whereas this, I guess this is edible, but I wouldn't want to eat it. If you have hogs, they'd happily eat that. And then the good seed should sink to the bottom of the container, so we'll just pour off the top of decant, so pour off the lighter seed and whatever's floating, and then we wind up with seed. And we pour that into a strainer, spray it a little bit, and then we'll put it into a mesh bag and then put fans on it or let it dry in the greenhouse. We want to get it dry, so up until this point, you know, the seed is happy to store in a wet fruit. At this point, the seed does not want to be wet anymore. If you keep it wet, you risk germination, you risk molding. So I want to get the seed dry as quick as possible. So within 24 hours or less. And then, and then that's the seed, and then we store it and pack it into packs and bring it places like here. So I talked about selection in the field. But once you have your plants that are great, you can also keep the fruit from those plants separate, and you can bring it into your house, and then you can taste the peppers of each one and see which ones are good. So these are selections that were already great plants in the field, and then at this point I'm choosing the tastiest ones. So I'm not only selecting based on growing characteristics, but also cooking characteristics. In the case of peppers, I mean, there's a bit of storage too that happens. If something rots on your counter in 2 days, that's not a good candidate for keeping the seed. If it stores for 2 weeks and it tastes good, that's great. And you can do similar stuff with your squash. You know, if you have squash that stores really well through the winter and it tastes good, then you keep that seed. Now, there is a chance of cross-pollination. We're not going to get into that with squash, but like, the selection doesn't have to only happen in the field of choosing your best fruit. So squash cross-pollinates really happily. If you grow a squash and a zucchini side by side, and there's 3 squash species, but if they're the same species, like a spaghetti squash and a zucchini, or like a jack-o'-lantern pumpkin and a zucchini, they can cross-pollinate. And if you grow them side by side, you'll have over 50% of the next generation will be cross-pollinated. Something like peppers doesn't cross-pollinate as easily. If you grow them side by side, you'll only see 5% or so cross-pollination. Most of them won't cross. They'll all be edible. Now, the one thing that's really important to know is that hot peppers and sweet peppers can cross-pollinate. So if you have a sweet pepper variety and you get a 5% cross-pollination with hot peppers, some people will be really disappointed or surprised when they bite into something that's quite spicy. And if you have a hot pepper that's contaminated with a mild pepper, some people will equally be disappointed when their hot sauce isn't hot. So if you're going to keep seeds of hot peppers and sweet peppers, it's good to grow them 200 or 300 feet apart. They can be a little bit closer, but the closer they are, the more chance of crossing. But if you have a red pepper and a yellow pepper that are both sweet, and they're side by side, and they cross-pollinate, there's nothing. I mean, if you're trying to sell the seed as a specific variety, then people can complain. But if it's for your own use, there's still edible, it's still going to be delicious, and in some cases, something really exciting. And I'll talk about that in a second. But first, so in the case of squash, it's challenging to keep things from cross-pollinating. You can use distance. You can also have buildings in between them. You can have sunflowers in between them. You can also tape the flowers shut and then open them up and do the pollination yourself. With peppers, it's easier because the same flower produces pollen and receives pollen, and they don't need insects to pollinate. So you can cover them with something like row cover here, and they'll self-pollinate underneath that. So if we really want something to be pure, and we could have like a pepper, there's a row on the left, and then one right beside it, they won't cross-pollinate together. And for commercial seed, we definitely take those measures. But it's also really fun to have things that do cross up. So this is a Bulgarian carrot pepper. It's a hot pepper, kind of like a cayenne, but orange, that we got in 2005 or 2006. And we grew out, so it's a seed we bought in, and we grew it out, and there was, let's say 100 plants, and 99 plants looked exactly like we wanted them to look like, or not that we wanted, that they were supposed to look like, and one was different, one was round. And it didn't look like anything else on the farm, so I was pretty sure it had cross-pollinated the year before at the person who had grown the seed. And we kept that seed, and we grew it out, and then the next year, so this is actually 2 years later, but there was a lot of diversity that came out of it. So there's some that look kind of like the parent, though they're not quite the same shape. They're a little bit longer, some are wider, and then some are rounder. And so there was all kinds of diversity that came out of that. They were all spicy, and they were all edible, and I really liked the ones in the upper right. So I kept those seeds, and the rest we gave to the CSA, or ate, or made hot sauce with. Nothing was composted or thrown out. It was all used. But we kept the seeds that we liked the best, and then grew in the next generation. There was still diversity, but less diversity. And the diversity tended to be rounder. And then we saved the seed again, and it kept going that way. And now, this variety looks like this. And when I keep it, it always looks like that. So that's something that took 6 or 7 years to get that way. And along the line, there's still a lot of diversity in the plant shapes, but I keep selecting for what has the most traits that I like. So we call this our carrot bomb pepper. And that's something that, it didn't take any extra space because we were using the hot peppers. We were selling the hot peppers anyway, or using them ourselves, and we wound up with an end product that we liked. So that's a pepper story. I'll tell a winter radish story now. So these are 2 radishes. So winter radishes, so there's spring, what I call spring radishes are like what you have the little red round ones, or like the French breakfast ones that are kind of elongated with a little bit of white and red. And those you can grow them almost any time of year, but spring they're great, and they're ready in 4 weeks. Winter radishes, you want to plant them in mid-July, and then they get to be bigger. It can be like size like a golf ball, or larger to softball size. And then you harvest them in sometime between September and early November, and they store really well through the winter. So those are winter radishes. They're the same species, so they can actually cross together, the spring and winter. Now, on the left is what's called the watermelon radish. So this is white and green on the outside and red on the inside. And on the right is a black radish, which is black on the outside, and you don't see it here, but it's white on the inside. And what I just showed you, the pepper story with the that carrot bomb, that's something where there was an accident, an unexpected cross in the field that I kept. Now with the radishes, I wanted to see what would happen if I would cross them. So I harvested these in the fall and overwintered them, and then the next year I grew 6 of each radish side by side and let them cross-pollinate. And we'll go through what happened. So we collected the seed of the watermelon radish and kept it together, and the black radish and kept it together, separate envelopes. And then the next year, go out and we sow a row of each of them. And most of them, they all germinated and they came up, and most of the watermelon radish was watermelon, and most of the black radish was black radish. And I wasn't surprised at that, because when these were in flower, one of them, I think the watermelon radish flowered earlier, and the other one flowered a little bit later. So it was only a brief period where they were both in flower. So there wasn't that much pollination, cross-pollination. But there was some. So we sowed it, we watered it, okay. I'll get back to the radishes. I wanted to talk a little bit about farming here. So we sowed the radishes, and we sow them 2 rows per bed, so there's a little bit more space. If it's like beets, we might sow them tighter. If it's turnips, even tighter. But radishes, I like to give them a little bit more, the winter radishes, I give them more space. And then we overhead water them to get them going. This is actually, the watering is so critical with the winter radishes because we're often planting them in the middle of the summer in like the hottest and driest 2 or 3 weeks. And these will till up the bed, and I know tilling's wrong, even before Graham told us, but once you till it, it takes a lot of the moisture out. So you sow it, we really need to irrigate to get the moisture to germinate them. And then it's weeding time, so we have a diversity of different weeding tools. And so this isn't specifically winter radishes, it's some other lettuces that we're weeding, but we'll go through and we can use hand tools to weed, and in a garden context we would. And we want to start weeding, within 7 to 10 days of sowing, we want to start weeding, and we want to weed when the seeds are just starting to germinate. So you barely see them in surface, but if you rub your fingers through the soil, you'll see the little white roots. And so that's the white root stage. That's the perfect time to weeding, because you can go through and just scuff the soil gently, and you'll disturb the root, and then it'll dry up. So we'll weed that way. We also have, this is a cultivating tractor. There's other cultivating tractors like not Planet Juniors. What are they called? Like Farmalls. This is a hefty G that released in the early 80s. Reed, one of my co-farmers, has converted this, so it's actually run off electrical power. And rather than diesel. And so this is a cultivating tractor that we use to weed the crops. And so you can see here, you can see directly underneath you, and it makes it really easy to follow the rows and weed. And then there's sweeps that are weeding between the rows. And then up front, it's not in action here, but we have basically a flamethrower that is in front. So if we go down before our crop has germinated, we can burn the weeds. So radishes germinate so quick that this probably wouldn't work with them. But something like carrots will take 1 to 2 weeks to germinate. So like lamb's quarter and amaranth, which come a lot quicker, they'll germinate first. We can go through and then flame them, and it cleans up, and then the carrots come. So this is what that would look like at a bit of larger scale. So we got our radishes, our 2 nice rows, and then we'll harvest them. And so what I found with the watermelon radishes, most of them were watermelon, and the black radishes, most of them were black radishes. But then there were these beautiful, they're not so beautiful, but there was these radishes that came up amongst them. And they looked pretty much all the same. So this is what's called the F1 generation. It's the first generation after there's been a cross-pollination. And they were kind of purple on the outside right through, which I was not expecting that. Like this did not look like, there's a bit of that black skin, like kind of rusted thing on the outside here, but everything else, this didn't look like any of the radishes that we had other than in shape. But I kept those. I grew them out, and I kept them through the winter, and the next year planted them, they cross-pollinated, I kept the seed, and then, so this is what we'd started off with, right? And then when I saved the seed in the F2 generation, I got all kinds of diversity. So there were some that were white on the outside, white on the inside. There were some that were pink on the outside, pink on the inside, pink on the outside, white on the inside. There were some that had a little bit of black and pink, and then some that had a lot more of it. So there was all kinds of diversity in there. And now, when I had made the cross, I had kind of dreamed about something that had black on the outside and pink on the inside, and that was there. So I started taking those roots, overwintering them, growing out the next year. Do you have a question?
Yeah. What did you cross to get to that? To the second?
So this was where the crossing happened. I let those 2 cross together, and then the ones that crossed looked like this. I kept these, and I let these cross within themselves. So I didn't cross anything else in it. I just let them cross within itself, and with that crossing, there was a lot of genetic recombination of all the genes that were there. So it started so the potential for stuff like this existed, but it needed to work its way through the system. Or not through the system, but just need to the possibilities needed to start to recombine. And that's what I started seeing here, was as they started to recombine the different genetic combinations started to show up here. And so I started to keep these roots and grow them out, or overwinter them, and then grow them out the next year without, like, isolated, so they would be, and some of the next generation looked that, and every generation would look more and more like that. And so, again, so we grow them in the field, and then we dig them out, and then we could see what they look like visually, and anything that I liked, I would harvest. And if you're doing roots, you got to keep some of the growing tip on it, because if you cut too flush with the root, you're going to damage it, and it won't propagate afterwards. So that would be our stock roots for the next year. And I'm doing it based on what they look like on the outside. Can I see a little bit of color through the black? And then anything that didn't quite meet our standards for the project, we would just cut tighter, and those would go into the vegetable baskets. And then so we'd bring in our selections and put them in bags for the cover through the winter, and store them through the winter. And then in the spring, when we take them out, so we're going to be doing this in a month and a half, we take each of the roots that we overwintered and we cut this little Muppet mouth into it to see what the inside looks like. And that's how we know, because it could still be white inside, so we kind of looked at it, cut them in, and we had a bunch. And what we do every year is we have our A selections, which are the darkest ones. They're all saying hi to you. They had the B selections, which are a little bit whiter, and then the C selections, which tend to be quite white on the inside, but pink on the outside. And in the early selections, we had to keep almost everything like this, because there wasn't, like, we wanted to have a big enough population for genetic diversity. But as we've done more selections over the years, there's more and more that are dark inside. And so at this point, we plant them into little pots. We keep them in the greenhouse for them to get going, just to make sure that they're alive. And then once they start to green up, we'll plant them out in the field. It's pulled now, but we actually plant the root in the field, and it makes a plant. We're not planting as dense as we would other radishes. They dry down, and then we harvest and we stomp on them. We also have this is a soil shredder, but it's like a wood chipper that we use to shred the seeds, not the seeds, to shred the pods, and then we keep the seeds. We can screen out the seeds from the chaff, and then we'll winnow out. And so this is the big seed cleaning. So for seed cleaning, it's like stepping on them, stomping them, and then using, it could be a spaghetti strainer or something to just take out the seeds, and then using the wind. And then in this case, the heaviest stuff will be here, and that should be the seed, and then the chaff blows out. You can do this out in the wind outside, but it's a little bit more risky, especially for small seeds. And then, so over time, this is, on the left is what like a black radish looks like. And this is what I was hoping to get, and we got that. But what I did not expect was to get this purple color too. So we have two sister lines that we keep separate. And so this is what's called our black amethyst radish. And they're not all that deep, but many of them are. And this just blows me away that this came out of that combination.
Fall radish.
It's a fall radish, yeah. I do dream about crossing it with a spring radish to get little ones that way, but I haven't got there yet. Maybe in 10 years I'll come and tell you about it. And then, so now, one of the you might get a feeling, or realize that when anything that looks different in the field, I love it, and then I try to keep it. So with all that diversity that came out of the radishes, it was pretty hard to just narrow down to a couple lines. So we've been keeping about 6 to 8 lines every year, and we have crossed in with some green luobo radish, which is kind of like long and green on the inside. And now, I don't know if this is a good marketing, but I call these skunk radishes, and I just think they're really fascinating. And we actually have a line that's purple on the inside, but looks like this on the outside. It might just be a personal project rather than a commercial project. But we do have a mix of all kinds of things. This is our kaleidoscope mix. So this is something that's kind of, each diversity keeps coming out. We talked about 3 stories. We talked about kind of harvesting and distributing the vegetables. talked about peppers, and we talked about radishes. And in these cases, so not all the seeds that we grow on our farm, and I'll come back to why, come from our farm, but the ones that do, we have a real capacity to influence what they're going to be like, and we can choose. So this is a Doe Hill pepper, and we've been we're selecting for what it looked like from the beginning, and we just keep maintaining it, and we're selecting for the best ones. Or we can change the variety, and that's kind of, as seed keepers, as seed growers, we steward the variety by maintaining how it's going to be down the line, and then passing it on to the next generation so they can keep going doing it. So thank you for listening to me. I blog about seed at danbrisebois.com, and also I'm on Instagram if that's the way, if you're interested in that. And I'd be happy to talk about questions. Yep.
How long do you let your seeds dry? What's your process of seed drying?
So for seed drying, I let them dry as long as we can, because if you don't want to pack up in a hermetic or like a sealed container something that's moist, and so probably at least 3 weeks we'll let them dry, and it's mostly air drying. Now, if it is a seed that was like squash or tomatoes or peppers that had a wet part of it, we will put fans on it to make sure it dries out first. But otherwise, air drying does the job, and then we'll pack it up on a dry day.
You can use your fresh seeds and plant them.
Excuse me?
You can use your fresh seeds and plant them.
Not always. A lot of seeds have dormancy because like without a human intervention, like they would want to, if they go to seed in the fall, they'd want their seed to survive to the next spring to then germinate. They wouldn't want to germinate too early because they might not make it. And so a lot of seed, like stuff like those radish seeds, a lot of brassica greens or mustards, they'll be dormant at germination. Often squash seed gets better with time. Sometimes you can trick the seed. So if you put seed into soil, often soil and you water it really thoroughly, that'll often overcome the dormancy, but not always. But usually.
And my last one, I guess, if you get a Scotch bonnet from the supermarket and then you're using that fresh seed, but it's not the one from your farm, would that have the same?
Well, so a lot of fruit from the supermarket, if there are seed in it, will germinate. However, if it comes from Mexico or Argentina, they might have a little bit of a different growing season than we do. So they might not necessarily do well in our climate. So that's the first problem. The second problem is, and I didn't talk about that here, but there's open pollinated seed and hybrid seed. So open pollinated seed is seed that it looks pretty much the same generation after generation as long as it doesn't accidentally cross-pollinate. Hybrid seed is taking two lines that cross together, kind of like I do with the radishes, but through different steps that they've done, the hybrid is always uniform. But when you keep the seed from that uniform plant, it gives that diversity like I showed with the radishes. So a lot of commercial seed is hybrid. And if you get it from the grocery store, it might be a hybrid. So one, it might not be fit for your climate, and then two, you might get all kinds of diversity. That being said, that's the beginning of a selection project. For some.
Is it organic though? Like if we're getting the seed from the supermarket and then we plant it, is it a seed that has GMO or whatever?
Well, so there's two parts to the organic at that question. So I'll talk about GMO second, but for organic, so legally, organic means that it's grown under certified organic principles. And so if you take in seed that's not organic and you grow it in an organic system and you have it on your certificate, it is now organic. So that's but that's just it's just words. Now, if we're talking about genetically engineered crops, if there's something that's genetically engineered, it can contribute pollen and potentially contaminate your seed. Now, we're on the cusp of a change with genetically engineered, but for a long time, the crops that were genetically engineered was really soybeans and corn. And so soybeans don't cross-pollinate easily, but corn does. So if you have a GMO cornfield beside another cornfield, they can cross, and there's challenges there. There's ways around it, but there's challenges with that. In the vegetable world, There are some summer squash that are GM, but the tomatoes that GM that have been released, they didn't taste good, so they haven't really been on the market. Though I have there's a news story going around about these purple tomatoes that were created through genetic engineering. And I think we're about to see a lot more of that stuff on the marketplace, and those can cross-pollinate in. In short term, you're always taking, we don't know what's going to happen with genetically engineered genes necessarily. But down the line, life does like diversity and tends to fix things through. So 100 years or 1,000 years from now, we'll have a better educated opinion on whether that's bad or not. On the short term, though, it seems like a lot of risk to just throw out there and not know what's going to happen. But I won't pronounce myself more than that on that. There was a question, was it your question about why we don't grow all our own seed? So one of them is that there are stuff that does a lot better as hybrids. And the reason they do better as hybrids is that 50 years ago, people started moving towards hybrids, and the open pollinated varieties have not necessarily been maintained. So if they'd done as much work for 50 years, we'd have really good open pollinated varieties. And so it's a bit of a self-fulfilling thing. Now, there's also some crops, so stuff like tomatoes, squash, beans, corn do great in our climate, as long as the variety is adapted to the day length. But they have, they've evolved to be in this kind of climate. Stuff like parsley or carrot seed, they don't like our wet summers. And even the droughtiest, hottest summers that we have are still damp and humid. And so they don't like that kind of climate, and it can be hard to get good quality seed. We haven't gotten good quality carrot seed. We're working on beets, but we haven't gotten as good as we like. Sometimes we get 40% germination, sometimes 80% germination. So it's just that some seeds, we can't get the quality that we'd like on a commercial level. Now, on a home garden level and for a smaller scale, you might not care as much whether it's 40% or 50% germination, but if we're going to sell the seed, we can't. And that's why we work with people in other climates to do that. There's also a challenge of isolation, that different varieties, if they're going to cross-pollinate, we can only grow so much diversity on our farm in any one given year. So those are some of the reasons that we don't use all our own seed. We've used as much as 30% of our own seed. Right now it's about 10%. And I think we're looking at it again, and we're going to start using more of our own seed again. But I would be shocked if it ever gets to be 50% of our own seed. I'd be thrilled, but that's not necessarily one of our short-term goals. The seed that we do use, we want it to be good. So, and we're happy we're doing some, which is more than a lot of farmers are. Yeah. Are there other questions? Alex?
How long does it take, so picture the roots being planted, the radish roots, how long does it take from that stage to harvesting the seed?
Do you mean the initial cross, or you mean just in an annual cycle?
Because you do it every year.
Yeah.
Different pods and you grow them out. What is the timeline for that stage?
So mid-July to, let's say August 1st, I sow the radish seeds. Mid-October, I harvest the radish root, choose the ones I want to keep, put them in a cold room. The next year, late April, I dig them up. We cut our little faces in them, or smiles in them. We pot them up. They go into the field first week of May, and then they go to flower. They have pods on them by mid-July. If they were to naturally dry down, they would want to dry down for about early August. We choose some and pull the plants and force them to dry down so that we can extract the seed and then plant it on August 1st. And then we water it really well because we want to avoid dormancy issues. And then, so this is a biennial, but because of the timing, we're able to get one crop a year. If with carrots, we couldn't do that. It would have to be 1 year to produce it, another year to get the seed, and then the next year to produce the root. So that's carrots.
So let's say we're using just one pepper plant, and then all the peppers are ready, we're harvesting them, then more will grow. Is there, in your opinion, a limit to the one plant of what it can produce? And then when do we replace it, or?
Do you want to repeat your question?
Okay, so you have one pepper plant that's producing any type of pepper.
Yeah.
And then you have your harvest, they're all ready, you harvest them, and then more will grow, from the
Yeah.
plant. Is there a limit usually to the amount of peppers one plant can grow? If
Okay.
so, do we renew with the new plant? Do we change it to another bed, or what would be the technique to have kind of consistency and renewal in our pepper planting?
Okay, so in our climate, we're pretty much limited to have peppers be annuals. In other parts of the world, some of the peppers are perennial. But so really, it's planting the pepper in the spring, and then you grow it out. And it's rare to do a second planting. So it wouldn't be about replacing that plant. But peppers, most keep putting on fruit, and the limit is really when the fall comes. And you don't have to have your first fruit be the one that's for pepper, for seed. It could be almost any of them as long as it gets ripe. And so, some varieties produce 3 to 5 peppers and that they're done. I don't love those varieties. I like varieties that are going to put 10 or 12 or 15 peppers on a plant. And sometimes those are commercial hybrids, but often, like a lot of the varieties that we offer, they're often earlier varieties, a little bit smaller fruit, and can pack out a lot. So that I like that. Yeah, so they can produce a lot more. But what's really important is, for your own use, for 1 or 2 generations, 1 fruit on a plant is fine. But if you're going to keep your seed for many generations, that's not enough genetic diversity. You're going to want more genetic diversity, so you'd probably want to keep at least 10 fruit. And then you can mix them up. Now, if you're growing only 10 plants, this is some challenges there, but if you're growing 1,000 plants in your field, you'd want to be getting them from saving 10, 20, 30 plants, 1 fruit from 10 or 20 plants, and then mixing that up, growing it out, then you choose the best ones, and you're always keeping that genetic diversity, because that diversity is what lets plants evolve. And, through hot seasons, cold seasons, but also when they move different parts of the world, like when they come, south through north, kind of the way that, like squash and corn and beans came from the south and came up through North America that way. It had to be able to evolve, and then crops that moved through Europe, kind of from east to west, needed to be able to evolve. And so that diversity is really important. And that diversity that we keep in a population is a gift that we're giving to the next generation, so that they can select both to their climate and their soil, but also to their changing food preferences. If they want something that looks a little bit different, something that's spiced or something that's sweeter, all that potential is there. So it's not exactly what you asked, but it's an important part.
Removing the leaves, for example, what helps the plant grow more fruits? I guess would be my question. And then after, what's your favorite cover crop?
So with peppers, you can grow peppers by removing leaves and kind of trellising them. It's like some varieties, almost the same way you do tomatoes. I think that you're better to have a variety that has the potential to put a lot of fruit out, rather than trying to baby a variety that's not as good. So I would try a few different peppers, see the ones that produce the most fruit in your garden or your farm, and then focus on that. That would be the best bet, I think, for peppers. Something like tomatoes, there is a little bit more steps that you can do. Often, though, you're not actually getting more fruit. You might be getting earlier fruit, or spreading it out over the season, or getting prettier fruit, but not necessarily more fruit over the season. And one of the biggest things for quality, rather than just pruning, is like I show those caterpillar tunnels. Growing tomatoes in an area where there's no moisture that falls on them will really increase the fruit quality, because it's the wet leaves that's going to spread the disease. So that's like in a home garden, you don't care if you do want to have the perfect tomato, but you'll eat a not so great tomato. But if you're selling something, your clients are not going to choose something that has spots on it. So if you can grow it in an environment that's going to make it look better, they'll buy more. Yeah. Favorite cover crop?
And also, I guess, what's a good replacement for a caterpillar tunnel? Because
you got a lot of questions.
they're really expensive. That's what I'm asking.
Yeah. I'm going to skip the cover crop question, but the caterpillar tunnel, what's nice about a caterpillar tunnel versus a greenhouse is caterpillar tunnels can be pretty much as short or as tall as long as you want. You can start with a few arches, and then as you either have more need or more means, you can extend it. And in the summer, it doesn't matter orientation so much. In the winter, I think it matters more, but I can't remember the right orientation. Yeah, I think Steven is ready to bust me. So, you want to come on in?
Yeah.
Yeah. Or is there another question that you want me to answer first? Anybody have a question that's lingering?
Yes, so first where you had, I think it was geotextile that was keeping the humidity and the heat high in your pepper rows.
Yeah.
We also learned from P3 how great wood chips are for similar reasons. Have you used both, and what do you think?
Wood chips don't add heat early in the season. They'll actually cool things down. So they have similar benefits, like for weed control, for moisture control. But in terms of warming up, they don't have that same benefit. So that's a challenge. Yeah.
And one last question: do you pinch your peppers, or too short of a season?
So if we're ahead of the curve in the season, we will go in and pinch the first flower in the middle of each pepper, because that one, if it have a big pepper there, it can split the plant. But we don't we try to, but sometimes we don't.
Okay, thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Okay. Thank you very much. Now I'm going to call him Breezy. So let's give another big hand. Louder this time. So just before we have closing prayer, I just want to make another announcement very quickly that on September 14th, on Saturday, September 14th, we'll be having our second annual harvest fair here in Ganawagi. So there'll be more promotion